Okay, and welcome to this final instalment on the social distribution of crime. So we've covered class, we've covered gender, and now it's time for ethnicity. So this is page 77 to 79 in your pack. A very short section of your pack indeed, but we will go through this and just clarify any points. There is a long PowerPoint, so I'm not going to linger on every single slide. I will skip through a few, but as I say, you've got this PowerPoint sent to you separately, so you can use this in your own time. So the first thing to get you think about, we've got some images on the next two slides, which looks at the relationship between ethnicity and crime. And again, it's just a thinking exercise. You can look at these in your own time. I will give you a chance to pause the images if you choose, but have a think about how what these might show about ethnicity and crime. So here's image 1 with a Banksy, and here's image 2, and I think it's believed is from the most recent Notting Hill Carnival event. So again, what do you think this is going to suggest about the relationship between ethnicity and crime? So just to get you thinking, there are some sort of web links here. Now again, you'll be able to access these through the direct PowerPoint you've been given, but again, there's some videos that might be worth watching, looking at racial discrimination in police, looking at UN reports. The Stephen Lawrence case is a really important one, and as for my classes, I've emailed you a link to a documentary about the Stephen Lawrence case because I think it is quite influential in this topic. And lastly, where does ethnicity link to what we've done? So stats, functionalism, like with the other social distributions, there is a lot of overlap with other topics covered so far. Sociology is always this very synoptic subject. It does relate and tie together, and it goes around in knots and loops. So even stuff from education and from family will have part of a role to play in this topic. So for the top of page 77, here are two statistics or facts that can go in the patterns box for you. You've got the link for the full document, which again has a lot more information on it if you want to have a read for that. It's a little extension, but ultimately the two facts you can put in, the two patterns, are that black people are 3 times more likely to be arrested than whites. So there were 35 arrests for every 1,000 black people compared to 10 for every 1,000 whites. And also black women are more than twice as likely to be arrested than white women, where there are obviously 7 arrests for every 1,000 black women, but 3 for every 1,000 white. So you can see there is this imbalance in the way the criminal justice system treats ethnicity, and this is only looking at, see, in these particular examples, people from Afro-Caribbean and black backgrounds. Obviously, Asian communities experience similar disproportional levels of treatment. So as you can see here, again, more about the per 1,000 arrests. You can see there's a substantial difference there, but again, it highlights a few other different ethnicities. So for our final summaries on patterns of crime with ethnicity. So people from black backgrounds make up 3% of the UK population, but 13.1% of prison populations. Asian groups again make up 6%, 6.5% of the UK population, but 7.7% of prison populations. And white people are overrepresented in all stages of the criminal justice system. Now, when it comes to ethnicity and crime, there are 3 key explanations that we can fall back on. So the first is that black and minority ethnic groups, or BAME groups, commit more crime. Second argument is that the criminal justice system is institutionally racist, and the third argument is a combination of 1 and 2. So ethnic minority groups do commit more crime, criminal justice systems are racist, or it's a combination of the 2. So as an extension reading task, you've got the Keeping It Real article by Dr. Anthony Gunther. The link is in the PowerPoint, which you can access in your own time, but I'd say have a read of the article. It's a really interesting one. I've also attached it to the email that I've sent to my classes, but it's really important for highlighting how black youths associate and experience criminal justice systems, criminal injustice, and how it has become part of everyday life. Now we're going to go through the key theories, and you've got the table here for realism. Now realism hasn't changed. The reasons why individuals commit crime, marginalisation, relative deprivation, subcultures, exactly the same as when we did with social class. And I think that the factors apply equally to ethnic minority groups. So more likely to be marginalised, living in poverty, and are more likely to be drawn into subcultures as a means of achieving status. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through the next couple of slides, and it covers a few thinkers and theorists who aren't mentioned in your pack, but I think it would all be really important ones to use, particularly if you had a 30-mark essay. So I'm going to go through the PowerPoint slides, explain some of these theories to you, and if you want to make supplementary notes to add to your pack, I'd recommend you do that. So first explanation, we've got the subcultural theories. So thinking back to thinkers like Cohen and the focal concerns, and thinking about how young groups are more likely to experience status frustration. So young Black Caribbean males may gain status through knife crime, gun crime, because there's the other means are blocked. Clow and Nolan obviously also talk about how these groups are more likely to have access to illegitimate structures. We can even throw back to Shaw and McKay and differential association, and that growing up in an environment where more people are involved in criminal networks, you learn the processes much quicker. There's a clip here as well. We've watched this before, but feel free to have a look again. It's a really good explanation, or trying to explain young Black knife crime. Traditional Marxism, again, the borders between class and ethnicity are very, very overlapped, often because ethnic minority groups tend to be lower social classes. So concepts like capitalism being criminogenic and the worker shambliss could equally be applied to ethnic minority groups as it is to the working class, and that the idea that relative deprivation, greed all cause us to turn to crime. You could even take it a little step further, thinking about Merton and strain theory, the difference between the legitimate opportunity structure and the illegitimate, and that status, that strain between the goals of society and the means of achieving them. Labelling theory also has a big part to play, but isn't mentioned in your pack. So the labelling theories themselves, we often talk about working class and male offenders. They can equally be applied here. Ethnic minorities may see themselves in a particular way because of mass media stereotypes, education experience, the master status being applied. But even think about Cicero and negotiated justice, that young white middle class groups often have that ability to negotiate the labels, whereas young working class and ethnic minority groups do not. You can think about deviance amplification, scapegoating, moral entrepreneurs, all relating here. To take it a step further, think about, is this too deterministic? Is this just assuming that every young Black male is going to be labelled negatively and is going to accept it, and a self-fulfilling prophecy will occur? So we can question whether this is too deterministic. Another theory here for you that again isn't mentioned, but I think is equally worth recognition, is Stuart Hall's study on mugging as part of the new criminology. So again, it was the racist police, more likely used to stop and search laws, and it was often minority ethnic men who were targeted because they were looking particularly for young Black male muggers, which created the scapegoat. And if you think about his full theory of deviance, which is the combo of Marxism and labelling, and how that really scapegoated particularly young Black men and led to an increase in crime, deviance amplification. Realism has a role here as well. So right realists would argue that single parent families, particularly common within ethnic minority groups, leads to poor socialisation, poor role models, dependency on benefits, the creation of the underclass and rational choice all lead them to commit crime. We can even throw it back into education of families, cultural deprivation, how that all has a part to play in this process. So in addition to left realism, who we've already seen. Now, coming back to our pack, page 78, we've got Gilroy. Gilroy, being a neo-Marxist, is a really influential study, talk about called police. It does overlap with Hall's Policing the Crisis. But again, arguing that there's political resistance to racism in society, and that racist society stereotypes and criminalises Black people. So it's a form of form of oppression. And again, you've got the video link here for some of his research, and I'd say have a look at them, watch them to help with your understanding. Hall, who has done Police in the Crisis, I mentioned him recently, just a minute ago, again, links to this and is a very good example. A more contemporary discussion could be even thinking about the Windrush generation, and how people who have lived in the UK their entire life and have been part of British society face deportation. And again, the sort of quite ruthless sort of approach that the government took in this process. And lastly, environmental approaches. Now, this is also mentioned in your pack, so this kind of overlaps a little bit with, as I mentioned, about Shaw and McKay and the zone of transition, but you've got Fitzgerald, who talks about neighbourhood factors. So the idea that there's higher levels of street crime in the poorest areas of society, where often ethnic minority groups are more likely to live, they're more likely to face discrimination in terms of housing, employment, and differential association. So a lot of the environmental concepts you looked at for class can be just equally applied to environment. Last but not least, we hit the racism in the criminal justice system segment. So this is the work of Phillips and Bowling, who suggests that there is a relationship between crime and ethnicity, and ultimately that the ethnic minorities experiencing criminalisation is a product of the criminal justice system, which has a racial prejudice towards them. So he identifies two different types of discrimination, direct and indirect, but ultimately in both cases, particularly Black and Asian communities are disadvantaged. In indirect discrimination, this is used by rule of law, policies or practice that creates a disadvantage for ethnic minority groups. So in your pack on page 78, two ways that indirect discrimination occurs is through mistrust of police. So ethnic minority suspects are less likely to cooperate with police officers than white suspects during an interview. As a result, and failure to cooperate means that they're often less likely to be cautioned or be eligible for caution. They're less likely to be released on bail, and so it limits their chances for a reduced sentence because failure to cooperate. And social position is the second indirect factor. So often ethnic minority groups are more likely than white offenders to display the characteristics that create them as a higher risk candidate. So poor housing, lack of a fixed address means that they're less likely to be released on bail and therefore detained while under caution, under investigation. So that can be an indirect discrimination. Direct discrimination is again caused by a person or group being deliberately or specifically treated unfairly because of their religion, race, or national identity. And Philip and Bowling identify 5 examples of direct discrimination. So stop and search policies, the first one. There's an unproportional amount of stops and searches against Black and Asian communities compared to whites. So that's one form of direct discrimination. Institutional racism within the police. The McPherson report highlighted, following the death of Stephen Lawrence, that the Metropolitan Police was found to be institutionally racist, and the way that his case was handled caused serious sort of failings in the case because he was a young black man. It was sort of assumed this was gang related. Number 3 was arrest, charges and proceedings. Ethnic minority suspects are far more likely to be charged and arrested, but then the Crown prosecution will drop the case due to a lack of evidence or doesn't meet the threshold for a conviction. So there's this idea that ethnic minority groups are more likely to be arrested and charged, but then the case kind of falls apart because there's no evidence to support that. Number 4 was discrimination in sentencing. So again, to secure a conviction of ethnic minority suspects, this is more likely to happen than the convictions for white suspects. It also means that prison sentences are longer for ethnic minority groups when they do secure convictions. And lastly, the overrepresentation in prison shows that there is this direct discrimination taking place. Now, just some examples of this. You can test yourself here. Again, you can pause the slide or the video, have a look at these statements and decide whether you think they are direct or indirect. So I'm going to give you a chance to pause. Okay, brilliant. If you've paused, obviously you're working this out. Here are the answers you can check for yourself. But again, good examples of direct and indirect discrimination. Last but not least, on the bottom of page 79, you've got the key concepts glossary, which is a nice, easy, straightforward one for you to complete. And as always, just before we wrap up, just some questions on the social distribution of crime. So some 4s and 6 here. Again, touching on the whole topic. So 2 reasons why some groups are more likely than others to be criminalized. That kind of opens up that you can talk about class, gender, and ethnicity for this first question. The second one's more specific, so ethnic differences in criminal conviction. So again, that's the one we want to make sure we've got conviction rates discussed there. So that would be, you could bring in the Phillips and Bowling or any of the evidence we've looked at. And lastly, 3 reasons why females are less likely than males to commit offences. So again, sometimes you get these comparison questions, comparing one group to another and differences in offending rates. As a 10 marker, we're back to ethnicity. So 2 reasons why black and minority groups are more likely to commit crime than white groups. Now, again, because of the way the item is structured, we've got Gilroy and the myth of black criminality. So we could, obviously, we talk about, you know, why they're more likely to commit crime. We could talk about racism, discrimination, prejudice within this. We can also use some of the left realism. So the item here is quite handy. It does give you a lot of hints and a lot of hooks and theories to jump off of. And then just as an example, some 30s. So social class differences in offending. So again, we're looking at offending and criminalisation. Now, again, these 2 words, offending and criminalisation. Always make sure you read the question, because sometimes you can get multiple elements: offending, criminalisation, or, sorry, my little boy's coming in, criminalisation and victimisation.